why your creative well hasn't actually run dry. Right now, there is a cold, hollow ache resting directly behind your rib cage, a quiet sensation of internal thinning as if the vibrant, electric speed that used to carry you through the world has begun to steadily decelerate. You are lying awake in the dark, watching the invisible current of time slide forward, filled with a subtle, creeping panic that the bright, flashing spark of your creativity, your mental sharpness, and your professional relevance is slowly slipping out of your grasp. The modern world outside moves at a frantic, noisy pace, constantly celebrating the loud, erratic bursts of youth and hyperproductivity, leaving you to wonder if you are gradually turning into an invisible ghost. You might find yourself mourning the effortless, fiery stamina of your earlier years, when ideas bubbled up without invitation, and you could outrun the clock without a single thought of depletion. Now, as the world seems to accelerate, your own internal rhythm feels heavier, slower, and deeply tired, prompting a restless fear that your inner well has permanently run dry. The room around you has grown still, filled with the soft, rhythmic hum of a cooling radiator and the faint scent of rain landing on the old cedar shingles just outside your wall. The shadows across your ceiling are long and dark, undisturbed by the bright disruptions of the daytime hours, creating a wide, protected enclosure for your body to rest. Yet, despite this physical stillness, your mind keeps returning to the ledger of your day, counting the moments where your energy lagged, comparing your quietude to the loud achievements of others, and treating your natural maturation as an existential emergency. You are pushing yourself to regain an old, volatile heat that no longer fits the architecture of your soul, mistaking a sacred distillation for a tragic loss. But what you are experiencing tonight, dear friend, is not a failure of your creative spirit, and you are not broken. The quietness descending upon your inner world is not a sign of decay, it is the arrival of a deeper, unshakable depth. Tonight, we will not force your mind to be completely silent, nor will we try to artificially recreate the frantic, blinding fire of your younger days. We are simply going to allow the smoke to clear so you can see the profound richness that remains when the flashing sparks have settled. There is a beautiful, liberating paradox within ancient Buddhist wisdom that speaks directly to this fear of slowing down. The mind assumes that to be vital, to be relevant, and to be valuable, it must remain in a state of perpetual, explosive motion, constantly producing, reacting, and sparkling for the world to see. But the teaching of transformation reminds us that the brightest, most volatile flames are also the ones that produce the most blinding smoke and the quickest burnout. True spiritual and creative power does not vanish when the initial frantic friction of life begins to ease instead. It undergoes a profound, quiet distillation, moving away from the superficial turbulence of the surface and sinking into a dense, permanent depth. The apparent loss of your rapid, nervous energy is actually the clearing away of unnecessary agitation, allowing the true, unblemished background of your awareness to finally become visible. You have not lost your internal wealth, you have simply moved from the noisy marketplace of constant doing into the silent sanctuary of pure being. If it feels right, take a slow, unhurried breath into the deep bass of your lungs, noticing the cool, spacious quality of the air as it enters, and let it go with a long, heavy exhalation that carries no immediate demand. You do not need to force anything in this moment. Nothing is required of you now. The active world has closed its ledgers. The competitive arenas have turned off their spotlights, and you are safe enough to soften the tight, defensive guard you have been holding around your chest all day. Imagine your current state of exhaustion not as an empty desert, but as a traditional textile house at dusk where the great wooden vats of dark indigo dye are resting in the shadows after a long season of harvest. During the heat of the day, those vats were stirred constantly, bubbling with a violent, aggressive froth that looked powerful but was actually full of air and unstable bubbles. But now, in the cool of the evening, the frothing has completely ceased, and the dark liquid has settled into an absolute unmoving silence. Maybe you have felt this too during the quiet transitions of your week, a sudden wave of guilt that tells you that if you are not actively producing or innovating, you are falling behind. We are conditioned by a restless culture to treat our changing energy as a personal defect, believing that if we cannot maintain the frantic pacing of our youth, We are losing our place in the world. But look at how, even while your mind is spinning these terrifying scenarios of future irrelevance, your physical body remains perfectly anchored here in the safety of the dark, supported by the steady ground beneath your mattress. The frantic, aging self that your thoughts are desperately trying to fix or protect does not exist anywhere in this room. It is merely a collection of old concepts, a series of fragile shadows drifting through your consciousness. You do not have to solve your whole life tonight. The deep sediment of your accumulated wisdom does not require you to put on a frantic display before it agrees to hold the value of your existence. In a moment, we will journey to a quiet drying barn in the mountains, where an old master dyer understands exactly how a vat must cool before it can yield a color that never fades from the cloth. But before we explore his workshop, let yourself simply land within the spacious, unformed reality of this late hour. You do not need to scrub the anxiety from your thoughts or force yourself to feel a superficial sense of confidence right this second. Even the simple willingness to notice the cold, hollow ache under your ribs without running away from it is a profound act of gentle mindfulness. Let your shoulders drop a fraction of an inch deeper into the bedding. Let the skin across your temples relax, and let your hands loosen their grip on the day. You have spent so much energy trying to outrun the natural seasons of your life. Tonight, you can let the frantic sparks burn themselves out in the dark, allowing your awareness to sink toward the cool, silent bottom of the basin, where the true weight of your presence is waiting to hold you. The air inside the mountain dye works was thick with the rich, pungent scent of fermenting indigo leaves, an earthy, humid aroma that seemed to carry the weight of many winters. High up under the rafters of the long, drafty drying barn, hundreds of linen hanks hung in dense rows, looking like silent, dark waterfalls frozen in the shadows. A middle-aged artisan named Koi stood in the center of the earthen floor, his knuckles white as he gripped the handle of his tools, his chest tight with a familiar, suffocating frustration. For years, Koi had been celebrated in the lower provinces for his rapid, fiery output, his ability to mix vibrant, bright dyes that caught the morning light with an aggressive intensity. But lately, the passage of time had begun to alter his internal landscape. His limbs felt heavy. His creative impulses no longer arrived with the lightning-fast reflexes of his youth, and he found himself staring at the raw cloth for hours, paralyzed by the fear that his internal spark had completely burnt to ash. He looked across the dim room at Master Toho, an elderly master dyer whose back was slightly curved from decades of labor. His long, thin hands permanently stained a deep midnight blue that reached all the way down to his cuticles. Toho was leaning over the rim of an ancient iron-hooped wooden vat that sat deeply embedded in the earth, its dark liquid absolutely still, cold, and silent. Koi stepped toward the elder, his voice trembling with a mixture of grief and hidden panic as he laid down his burdens. He explained how his mind felt sluggish, how the bright, frothing enthusiasm that used to fuel his long nights had vanished, leaving him feeling like an empty, irrelevant shell in a workshop that moved faster than his energy could match. He confessed his deepest terror, that his life's work was deteriorating because the heat had gone out of his blood. Master Toho listened without breaking his gaze from the dark surface of the basin. He did not offer words of standard comfort, nor did he tell Koi to try harder. Instead, he reached out his ink-colored fingers and picked up a heavy porcelain stirring paddle that rested against the wall of the vat. The paddle was thick, smooth, and heavily stained with a deep, midnight blue residue at the tip from a lifetime of touching the dye. The old man did not plunge the instrument into the liquid. With a violent, churning motion instead, he held it perfectly horizontal across the top of the open vat, letting the faint twilight from the high windows strike the porcelain surface. Toho asked Koi a simple, quiet question, his voice rustling like dry autumn leaves in the corner of the barn. He asked the younger man if the power of the dye lived in the bubbles that rose to the surface when the water was whipped into a frenzy, or if it lived in the quiet sediment that rested completely undisturbed at the dark bottom of the wooden tub. Koi looked down, his eyes following the clean, stained line of the porcelain paddle. He replied that the bubbles were mostly air, disappearing into the wind within a few breaths, while the heavy sediment was the substance that actually gave the linen its permanent, unchangeable color. The old master nodded slowly, placing the heavy paddle gently across the wooden rim of the vat so it rested like a small bridge over the darkness. He told Koi that a new vat always bubbles with a fierce, aggressive froth demanding attention, hissing and popping with a volatile heat that looks magnificent but is easily ruined by a sudden chill or an extra drop of rain. That is the energy of a youth who thinks they must scream to be seen by the world. But an ancient vat, one that has weathered 40 winters, has learned how to let the bubbles die down completely. Its surface becomes as flat and dark as a frozen pond, yet beneath that absolute silence lies a dense, concentrated essence that has distilled itself over decades. When you dip a cloth into the quiet vat, the color does not wash away with the first scrubbing. It sinks into the very core of the fiber, remaining true long after the weaver has gone. Koi stood perfectly still in the damp coolness of the barn, his gaze locked onto the heavy porcelain paddle, resting so securely over the unmoving liquid. A profound wave of emotional recognition passed through his chest, making the cold tightness under his ribs loosen with a sudden heavy sigh. He realized that his recent deceleration was not a sign that his creative well had dried up, nor was it a failure of his devotion. He had simply been mourning the loss of the superficial foam, completely blind to the fact that his life was trying to invite him into the rich, permanent sediment of his own accumulated wisdom. He had been exhausting himself trying to force an old, volatile fire to burn in a season that required the deep, silent presence of stone. The old dyer reached out, his twilight-stained hand gently patting the younger man's shoulder before he turned to walk toward his sleeping quarters, leaving Koi alone with the resting tubs. The wind outside had died down, and the smell of the damp cedar shingles grew richer as the darkness claimed the corners of the drying barn, wrapping the long hanks of linen in a protective, seamless shadow. Let this image of the heavy porcelain paddle and the silent indigo vat find a quiet home in the background of your own thoughts tonight. Notice how the artisan did not need to force his heart to beat faster or manufacture a false state of youth to regain his place in the world. He simply had to stop treating the natural cooling of his life as a personal catastrophe. The mountains around the workshop are wrapped in the absolute silence of midnight, and inside the barn, the dark basins are resting securely in the earth. As you lie here in your own room, let your physical frame imitate the deep, settled weight of that ancient wooden vat. You do not need to produce a single bright flash of inspiration tonight, and you do not need to prove your relevance to a loud world before you are permitted to close your eyes. Let the frantic, bubbling anxieties of your day sink down completely through your mattress, allowing your awareness to settle into the dense, cool depth of your own seasoned presence, where the value of your being is safe from the passage of time. This slow settling of the active foam inside the drying barn is not telling us to abandon our passions, to give up on our creative vocations, or to stop feeling the deep beauty of the world around us. It is not asking us to become cold, detached statues, or to look at our changing lives with a flat, indifferent numbness that drains the color from our days. It is showing us something much quieter, an internal posture that allows us to walk through the natural seasons of our life without letting the fear of deceleration tear our mental sanity apart. When we lie awake under the weight of feeling less productive or less noticed, our genuine suffering is rarely caused by the actual slowing down of our reflexes, or even by the shifting landscape of our industries. The true exhaustion arises from the specific way the mind holds the concept of aging, turning a natural distillation into a terrifying proof of personal bankruptcy. We create a desperate internal demand that insists we must remain perpetually volatile, perpetually loud, and perpetually identical to our early years. And then we panic when our bodies invite us to rest. An ancient insight within Buddhist wisdom reminds us that life inherently brings a primary layer of experience, a first wound that is simply the reality of change itself. It is the natural presence of time, the reality that a physical body alters, that an industry evolves, and that the fiery nervous stamina of youth cannot be stretched indefinitely across a lifetime. This first layer is completely clean, neutral, and forms the very fabric of being human. But the second wound is the immense agonizing weight we add to ourselves through our frantic psychological resistance. It is the narrative that claims your current quietness makes you an empty fraud, the habit of comparing your seasoned presence to someone else's initial explosion, and the harsh self-judgment that treats a deep transition as a personal failure. Wisdom helps us stop adding this secondary injury to our hearts, allowing us to step back from the edge of the emotional cliff and observe our changing landscape with a gentle, non-defensive gaze. When we translate these deep principles into the vocabulary of our modern emotional struggles, what we often call attachment is nothing more than that tight, anxious clawing that says, "I must remain at the peak of my frantic output forever, or I will lose my right to be loved." It is a desperate craving for validation through constant doing, an assumption that if we can only force ourselves to mimic the speed of our 20-year-old self, we can somehow trick time into leaving us completely safe from obsolescence. We treat our changing energy as a dangerous defect to be hidden rather than a sacred, natural distillation. But mindfulness, when approached with true soft tenderness, is simply the capacity to look at the terrified, overactive thoughts behind your eyes without believing everything they shout in the dark. It is the ability to feel the cold, hollow ache under your ribs, to acknowledge the fear of being left behind, and to whisper to yourself, "There is a protective panic trying to run my mind tonight, but I do not have to obey its frantic orders." This shifting of your internal perspective brings an immense, soothing relief to our understanding of impermanence. We are conditioned by a restless, hyperproductive culture to view the fluid passing of our seasons as an enemy that threatens to strip us of our relevance and leave us invisible. But the reality of change also means that no dry spell, no moment of fatigue, and no professional transition can ever freeze you into a permanent state of uselessness. Your creative spirit is not a rigid glass vase that shatters the moment its shape alters. It is a living, shifting stream of pure awareness that will continue to offer fresh colors, unexpected depths, and mature expressions at every single stage of your journey. The static, unchanging self that your intellect is fighting so hard to preserve does not exist anywhere in reality. You are an evolving current of presence, and just as the ancient indigo vat becomes more valuable when its aggressive frothing stops, your life becomes infinitely richer when you allow yourself to move from the noise of constant display into the unshakable weight of your seasoned depth. By welcoming this understanding into your quiet room, a silent, profound sense of compassion begins to dissolve the old, sharp criticisms you have been throwing at your own fatigue. True compassion is not a rigid moral exercise. It is the radical willingness to look at your own heavy shoulders and realize that your anxiety was never a defect. You have been overthinking and panicking at night because you care so deeply about contributing beautifully to this world. Not because you are weak or failing, but as the old dyer demonstrated with the heavy porcelain paddle, the ultimate worth of the craftsman was never determined by the volatile bubbles that popped and vanished in the wind. The power was held entirely by the dense, dark sediment that rested securely in the earth, requiring no noise to prove its permanent value. Your capacity for peace does not live in an old burnt-out fire. It lives in the spacious, silent background that is currently holding your breath. Slowly, the weight of this ancient teaching moves closer to the immediate surface of your mattress, blending with the deep, rhythmic movement of your lower abdomen in the dark shadows. You do not need to discover a brilliant, innovative strategy for your career before your body is permitted to let go of its guard tonight. The world outside your window has completely stopped its striving, letting the dark rain fall upon the old cedar shingles without asking for validation from anyone. Allow yourself to drop the heavy burden of perpetual youth, recognizing that the very quietness you have been fighting is actually a spacious, cool sanctuary, waiting for you to stop churning the water and simply trust the depth that has already been distilled within you. If it feels right, let your awareness begin to slide down away from the frantic calculations spinning behind your eyes, allowing your attention to gently ground itself in the physical weight of your body resting here in the darkness. There is absolutely no need to adjust your posture with any sense of rigid determination. Perhaps simply notice the direct point of contact between your shoulders and the surface beneath them, letting the small muscles along your shoulder blades slacken a tiny bit at a time. You might take a slow, unhurried breath in through your nose, tracking the cool sensation as it crosses the back of your throat, and let it pass out through your mouth like a quiet, warm wind moving through a silent valley. There is no requirement for you to change anything about this immediate moment. Even the simple act of noticing how tightly you have been holding the space around your ribs is an act of perfect, gentle mindfulness. You do not need to force the internal static to clear through sheer willpower. You only need to sit quietly at the center of your own unforced evening. As you continue to breathe softly, let your attention travel to the small, overactive fibers right across your brow and temples, where the nervous energy of comparison has been humming all day long. You might imagine those tight areas opening up, allowing your gaze to soften into the dark, velvety space behind your eyelids. Now let your awareness drop all the way down into your lower abdomen, your hips and your thighs, where your natural capacity for grounding lives. Do not try to minimize or push away the heavy restlessness that may still be vibrating inside your chest. Instead, simply name the emotional pattern that has been driving this current of anxiety. Perhaps it is the habit of demanding a constant, spectacular display of fireworks from your mind before you permit yourself to feel valuable. Perhaps it is the old, tired pattern of treating your natural need for deceleration as an enemy to be defeated. Just label it gently in your thoughts, recognizing it as a deeply protective mechanism that has only been trying to ensure your survival by keeping you in a state of perpetual volatile motion. Imagine, if you will, the wide, quiet drying barn from the old story sitting securely right within the space of your own awareness. See the long hanks of linen hanging like silent waterfalls in the shadows, and find the ancient, iron-hooped wooden vat embedded deeply in the earthen floor. Instead of using your mind to desperately whip the water into a frenzy or recreate the volatile bubbles of the past, you might simply visualize that heavy porcelain stirring paddle, stained a deep midnight blue at the tip, resting like a small bridge across the rim of your own consciousness. Watch what happens in your imagination as you place your current, spinning worries about aging, relevance, and exhaustion directly onto the flat, smooth surface of that paddle. You do not need to force a sudden, dramatic breakthrough. Even letting the weight of your day rest upon that stable instrument without trying to fix it is entirely enough. Let the internal image change slightly now, allowing the specific professional anxieties, the creative blocks, or the digital numbers you were counting to lose their sharp, jagged lines. They are not being erased or ignored. They are simply being allowed to sink beneath the surface, turning from an urgent crisis into a dark, rich sediment that rests quietly at the bottom of the basin. If your thoughts try to pull you back into the specific details of your ledger, or if your pulse quickens with the old urge to prove your stamina, that is completely okay. You can return to the heavy sensation of your quilt and the steady, cool rhythm of the rain outside your wall whenever you are ready. There is no failure if your focus wanders. The deep, ancient vat knows exactly how to hold a restless mind, and it does not require you to be perfectly still before it agrees to absorb your weight. What happened next as Koi moved toward the older parts of the temple grounds will show us an even deeper way to integrate this unmoving piece into your daily routine. But for now, let yourself remain right in this intermediate space where the work of production has been suspended. The dark air in your room remains steady, non-judgmental, and the heavy structure of your analytical guard is safe enough to unbuckle. One small strap at a time. You do not have to achieve absolute creative clarity before your eyes close for the evening. The purpose of this hour is not to force yourself to feel miraculously healed or instantly decided. The purpose is simply to help you feel less isolated inside the natural, turning seasons of your own life. Let your next exhalation be as wide and hollow as the drying barn, holding nothing but the simple, unhurried movement of the night as it settles over the roof. The late afternoon sun cast long, amber rays across the northern courtyard of the old mountain temple, illuminating the slow, silent settling of dust motes in the warm air. Koi walked slowly along the stone pathway, his mind still carrying a residual, stubborn friction from the weeks of creative stagnation he had left behind in the valleys. Though the image of the indigo vat had offered a brief window of intellectual comfort, his hands still felt empty, and his ego, still independent, fought against the quiet reality of his changing pace. He was walking toward the shaded rear courtyard where an old temple carpenter spent his remaining days. The elder no longer engaged in the grand, spectacular work of raising massive wooden beams or carving intricate, coiled dragons into the temple gables. Instead, he occupied himself with the smallest, most invisible maintenance of the grounds. When Koi entered the courtyard, the sharp, refreshing scent of freshly shaved cedar chips mingled with the deep, earthy smell of damp soil near the mossy stone foundations. The old carpenter was sitting on a low block of timber, his face a landscape of deep, weathered creases, his joints slightly swollen from a lifetime of handling heavy adzes and iron chisels. He was holding an unglazed earthenware cup containing cold, clear spring water, letting it rest steadily on his knee as he watched the shadows lengthen across the gray granite flags. The courtyard was completely peaceful, undisturbed by the loud construction sounds of the lower towns, filled only with the occasional, soft rustle of a bird nesting in the tiled eaves. Koi sat down on the low stone steps of the library veranda, his throat tight with a sudden renewed wave of his old inadequacy. He confessed to the old man that despite his efforts to embrace a slower pace, he still found himself waking up at night in a cold sweat, replaying the fluid, effortless productivity of his past. He admitted that every time a younger artisan passed him with a louder display of talent, an internal panic would flare up under his ribs, convincing him that he was becoming entirely obsolete. He asked the carpenter how he could bear to sit so quietly in the shade, doing nothing but watching the dust settle, when his hands had once built the very pillars that held up the temple roof. The old builder did not offer an immediate answer, nor did he look away from the lengthening shadows. He slowly lifted the unglazed earthenware cup and handed it to the younger man, its rough, porous clay surface feeling intensely cool and textured against Koi's trembling palms. The water inside was perfectly still, completely free of bubbles or movement, mirroring the wide, pale blue of the evening sky with absolute, flawless precision. The carpenter spoke in a low, resonant rumble, telling Koi that when he was young, his mind was exactly like a rushing mountain stream after a spring thaw, churning violently, throwing up white foam, slamming into rocks, and breaking its banks to prove its immense strength. It was a magnificent display, but it was so full of dirt and agitated currents that no one could see through the surface, and it could never hold a reflection of the moon for more than a fraction of a second. He pointed a calloused finger at the unglazed cup in Koji's hands, explaining that its true value did not live in its ability to move or make noise. The water's power was held entirely in its capacity to remain completely still, letting the heavy sediment drop naturally to the bottom, so that the background of reality could show its true face within the surface. He told Kui that his current suffering was not coming from a loss of his creative vital spark, but from his constant, exhausting habit of treating every fearful thought in his head as an absolute command that he had to fight or obey. He was drowning himself in the imaginary foam of next year, while ignoring the solid foundation stone he was currently sitting upon. Koi held the earthenware cup, watching the miniature sky reflected in the dark circle of the clear water. In that quiet gap between the old man's words and the rustle of the eaves, a subtle, profound transformation took root within his chest. He did not experience a magical, instantaneous burst of perfect enlightenment, nor did his deep-seated insecurities completely evaporate. Instead, he made one small, disciplined shift in how he met his internal world. He stopped fighting the reality of his current stillness. He allowed the uncomfortable sensation of being left behind to exist without trying to fix it or turn into a tragic narrative about his worth. He took a slow breath of the cedar-scented air, took a small sip of the cold spring water, and quietly returned the unglazed cup to the old man's knee, letting his mind rest inside the simple certainty of the late afternoon light. Now, let this gentle internal realigning move away from the temple courtyard and settle softly into the quiet environment of your own bedroom. The old carpenter and the smell of the cedar shavings are gradually fading into the background shadows, leaving only the cool, spacious quality of that still water to blend with your own breath. You do not need to transform into a flawless, unshakable master before your eyes are allowed to grow heavy tonight. True growth does not look like an explosive display of perpetual certainty. It looks like the simple willingness to breathe before you react to your own anxious thoughts. It is the capacity to let the frantic ledger of your day lie completely unread on the table, while your physical frame surrenders its weight to the bedding beneath you, resting securely within the single inch of time you are currently touching. When we look directly into the cold, hollow ache that keeps your posture rigid in the late hours of the evening, we can begin to dissect the intricate psychological machinery that converts a natural human transition into a state of chronic personal torment. The panic of watching your internal speed slow down is not a sign that you have lost your path. It is the raw result of an ego that has spent decades using hyperproductivity as an emotional shield against the world, to protect itself from the terrifying vulnerability of being unseen, forgotten, or deemed irrelevant. The mind constructs an internal courtroom where it endlessly rehearses the future and replays the past. We lie motionless under our covers, picking apart the moments where our energy lagged during the day, using intense self-judgment and shame as manipulative tools to force our minds back into a state of frantic, youthful execution. We mistakenly believe that if we can only whip ourselves with enough criticism, we can somehow jumpstart the old volatile fire. Over time, this constant friction hardens into a rigid, painful identity, until we stop seeing our fatigue as a temporary season and begin to define our very soul as an empty, dried-up husk that has been left behind by a faster world. This toxic habit of converting a changing rhythm into a measure of your fundamental worth is precisely what ancient Buddhist wisdom seeks to illuminate and deconstruct through the practice of gentle observation. The teaching invites us to look at our lives and separate the natural, clean reality of our circumstances from the elaborate mental architecture we build on top of them. There is a primary layer of existence, the first pain, which is simply what life naturally brings to our doorstep as we move through the seasons of adulthood. It is the simple fact that a brain shifts its focus, that a body requires a different kind of care, and that the aggressive, nervous stamina that fueled your early milestones must eventually give way to something else. This first layer is completely neutral, unavoidable, and holds no malice. It is merely the natural settling of the mountain dust after a long summer of activity. But the secondary layer, the second pain, is the infinite, exhausting web of commentary that your mind adds to the silence. It is the terrifying story that insists your quietness makes you invisible. The constant checking of external mirrors for a reflection of your old relevance, and the profound resistance that treats a deep distillation as a personal catastrophe. We cannot always control the first pain through sheer mental straining, nor can we force an ancient indigo vat to bubble with the unstable, frantic froth of a new harvest just because we fear the dark. But we can absolutely learn to stop feeding the secondary fire of our own anxious commentary. We can notice the creeping sensation of inadequacy under our ribs and choose to witness its presence without turning it into an executioner's blade that determines our right to exist. True peace, within this ancient perspective, is never defined as the total absence of structural difficulty, nor is it a magical guarantee that you will never feel the cold chill of professional insecurity again. Peace is an entirely different, non-defensive relationship with that difficulty. It is the willingness to look at the uncarved, plain wood of your current season and recognize that your value does not depend on your ability to make a loud noise for the provinces to hear. Your ultimate safety lives in the wide, unblemished capacity of your own awareness, which holds the silence of the evening with the exact same unconditional grace that it once held the flashing sparks of your youth. When you bring this simple, spacious clarity to the tight areas around your temples, the very texture of your creative frustration begins to shift its weight. You see that you do not need to solve the riddle of your remaining years or cure your natural deceleration before you are permitted to let your eyes grow heavy tonight. The desperate habit of using shame to fix your exhaustion only tightens the internal knots, making the heart feel like a hard, dry block of timber. by realizing that your true nature was never the temporary role, the high title, or the frantic pace you maintained in the lower towns. The terrifying stakes of your transition begin to dissolve into the shadows of the room. You are not a volatile flame that is about to be snuffed out by the passing of time. You are the wide, dark basin that remains perfectly secure, perfectly cool, and perfectly whole regardless of whether the water is frothing or completely still. The quietness descending upon your inner world is not a deficit to be hidden away. It is the natural, dignified arrival of your seasoned depth, a rich sediment of accumulated truth that requires no frantic self-promotion to maintain its permanent place in the cosmos. Slowly, this quiet integration allows the heavy wheels of your analytical mind to drift into a soft, effortless glide. The phantom futures of invisibility and obsolescence that were keeping your pulse fast lose their sharp geometric edges, melting away like the blue peat smoke rising from the carpenter's chimney into the vast evening sky. You do not have to carry the heavy ledgers of your professional competition into your dreams tonight. The realization that you are the silent space, witnessing the turning of your seasons rather than the broken, aging object trapped inside them, brings a profound physical reassurance to your entire frame. Let the muscles along your shoulder blades uncoil completely, letting the back of your skull settle deep into the center of your bedding as you surrender the daily chore of steering your own vitality. The room around you requires no frantic display before it agrees to shelter you, and the deep night is entirely satisfied to wrap your body in a dark, unmapped sanctuary where there is nothing left to defend, nothing left to fix, and nothing left to fear. This steady, silent collection of our energy inside the mountain courtyard is not intended to remain confined to a remote sanctuary. It is a vital, practical anchor designed to be brought directly into the fragmented, hyper-accelerated landscape of your modern daily existence. We encounter our modern volatile foam not on the rims of ancient wooden vats, but in the small, frantic habits that repeat themselves throughout our working hours. We feel it when we are lying awake at night, our fingers twitching as we repeatedly check a digital device for a message, an email, or a piece of data that might offer a temporary burst of reassurance, treating a silent screen as a terrifying confirmation that we are falling behind in life. We experience it when our thoughts keep replaying a minor professional mistake from 3 years ago, or when we look at the carefully curated updates of our peers and find ourselves trapped in a cold spiral of comparison, convincing ourselves that everyone else is moving faster, producing more, and living a much more vibrant version of adulthood. We spend so much of our public routine pretending to be perfectly fine, plastering a polite smile across our face while carrying an immense, heavy sadness right behind our breastbone. We try to manipulate the trajectory of our creative projects, our financial stability, or our long-term relationships through constant, exhausting overanalysis. Yet when our physical frame finally collapses from the sheer weight of this mental architecture, we find ourselves unable to sink into sleep because an invisible inner critic insists that resting without producing a tangible result is an act of guilt. But true peace is never achieved by finally discovering a flawless piece of technology or a master strategy that eliminates all human vulnerability. Peace is practiced in the tiny, unnoticed gaps of a chaotic afternoon. It is the willingness to pause for a single, unhurried moment before you answer an aggressive message, recognizing that this brief suspension of action is a profound form of living wisdom. A deliberate breath taken before you check your notifications or step into a stressful meeting is a direct realization that not every frantic thought spinning through your mind deserves your immediate obedience, and not every rapid spike of anxiety is an absolute command to pull your life apart. You can care deeply about your livelihood, your artistic expressions, and the people who depend on your strength without gripping the steering wheel so tightly that your forearms turn to iron and your throat turns to stone. You can live with an unresolved transition, with a slower processing speed, or with a temporary quietness in your creative field without letting that space ruin the simple neutral reality of the room you are currently inhabiting. Just as the carpenter's earthenware cup held its clear water without needing to move an inch, you are fully permitted to drop the heavy ledgers of your daily competition right now. simply because your body is tired, and because your existence does not require you to earn your rest through constant, frantic output. When you bring this seasoned grounding into your modern domestic triggers, the nature of your waiting changes its form. The slow period in your career, the lack of immediate applause, or the natural deceleration of your mental reflexes is no longer an emergency that proves your obsolescence. It is simply a moment where the water has become perfectly still, letting the heavy sediment drop naturally to the bottom, so that the background of your true awareness can show its face. By refusing to spin 5 different hypothetical disasters out of a quiet afternoon, you allow the present moment to remain exactly what it is, a soft, spacious gap that does not require you to write a tragic conclusion for it before the sun rises. You stop treating your natural need for rest as a defect to be corrected through shame, and you let it become a protective sanctuary where your active intellect can finally drop its sharpest chisels. As you lie here in the deep, velvety shadow of the late evening, let this poetic loosening move through the specific modern worries that were keeping your pulse fast an hour ago. The emails can remain unanswered in their digital folders. The indicators of external metrics can remain dark, and the frantic pace of the lower towns can be left to run its race without your participation. You do not have to achieve a brilliant, innovative breakthrough before your eyelids are allowed to grow heavy. The entire physical world has turned away from the blinding friction of the sun, letting the dark rain fall upon the shingles without asking permission from anyone, and you are entirely safe to follow its rhythm. Let your shoulders drop a fraction of an inch deeper into the bedding, letting the small muscles across your temples relax, and allow your frame to settle into the supportive depth of the mattress, trusting that the unmoving sediment of your own accumulated truth already knows exactly how to hold you without you needing to guide it. The active world has fallen completely away now, leaving only the vast, cool dark of the late night to fill the quiet spaces of your room. The internal ledgers have all been closed, the heavy porcelain paddle has been laid across the rim, and the frantic, buzzing comparisons of the daytime hours are no longer being tracked by your tired eyes. Let the speed of your internal monologue slow down to a whisper, matching the slow, heavy settling of the mountain workshop as the damp rain thins and clears beneath a silent sky. Your body is becoming profoundly heavy, sinking down into the mattress like that ancient wooden vat buried deep within the earth, unmoving and entirely untouched by the wind. With every unhurried breath you let go, your head feels increasingly spacious, increasingly empty, completely untangled from the frantic choreography of hyperproductivity. You have full permission to stop solving your whole life tonight. The unmade decisions, the career milestones, and the hypothetical failures you have been replaying do not need to be sorted, fixed, or conquered before you are allowed to sleep. Let the phantoms dissolve, letting the multiple versions of next year lose their terrifying sharpness as the cool air of your room enters and leaves your frame. You are no longer required to build a flawless monument across the unknown wilderness of the future, and you do not need to guarantee your relevance before your eyes can close. The seasons you have been resisting were never a tragic decay. They are simply the natural distillation of a supportive earth, and tonight your hands can rest completely, leaving your mind entirely unburdened by tomorrow. Listen to the absolute stillness that remains when the urge to maintain a volatile fire finally goes to sleep. The room around you is perfectly secure, and your breathing has become so quiet, so deep, that it barely ripples the stillness of the dark liquid across your sheets. The teaching is settling into the very core of your chest now, not as a complex lesson to memorize, but as a physical feeling of returning home to a baseline of peace that never needed a loud display to find its value. You are the wide, dark indigo vat at midnight, where the surface is completely flat, cool, and silent, reflecting nothing but the vast, dark sky. There are no separate sparks here, no separate futures to calculate, and no walls to maintain against the passage of time. Let yourself sink completely into the dark support of this deep sleep, giving up the final, stubborn pieces of the tools you have carried all day. The night is vast enough to hold everything you left unfinished, and the basin does not require the water to froth before agreeing to support its weight. Every muscle along your brow, your jaw, and your hands has gone completely slack, soft and open like a plain piece of uncarved cedar, resting on the courtyard floor. The dilemmas you spent all day trying to fix have lost their urgency, dissolving into nameless, quiet shadows that float harmlessly through the background of your consciousness. You are returning to the silent clarity that existed long before your mind learned how to worry about aging, a sanctuary of pure, untroubled presence that has never left your side. Let yourself dissolve entirely into this beautiful, velvety expanse, trusting the bed to hold you, trusting the ground to sustain you, and allowing your weary eyes to close completely on the noise of the provinces as you slide effortlessly into a deep, unbroken rest. What if the deep richness you have been fighting to produce through all these frantic sparks was already waiting for you to simply become still enough to hold its reflection? 3 YouTube title options. Final title. When the fear of aging exhausts your soul, Buddha's indigo vat story brings deep sleep. The reflection remains perfectly intact within the unmoving water, requiring no effort from the basin to maintain its clarity. When we lie in the quiet of this late hour, we can see that our lifelong search for validation has been based on a profound misunderstanding of our own nature. We have treated our consciousness like an employee that must constantly prove its worth through high metrics, rapid innovations, and flawless execution, forgetting that the baseline of our being is already a complete and holy masterpiece. The fading of your youthful, restless momentum is not a structural breakdown. It is the natural clearing away of the noise, so that the silent, unshakable background of your life can finally become known to you. You are not losing your place in the universe, you are simply stepping out of the crowded, exhausting market square and entering the deep sanctuary of your own seasoned weight. True spiritual maturation is the discovery that you do not need to be perpetually loud or endlessly productive to be profoundly relevant to the earth. The ancient trees on the mountain slopes do not apologize for their gnarled branches, and the deep granite foundations of the temple do not feel a sense of failure, because they remain completely motionless in the dirt, while the younger leaves dance in the wind. They understand the immense, protective power of simply holding space. When you allow your mind to stop churning the water tonight, you are aligning yourself with that very same elemental strength. The anxieties that seemed so solid and terrifying during the day, the fear of becoming invisible, the pressure to maintain a certain persona, the guilt of letting go of the plow, begin to reveal themselves as nothing more than temporary patterns of weather, passing over an immovable peak. Let your awareness expand past the narrow boundaries of your current worries, letting it become as wide and non-judgmental as the dark night sky that blankets the entire valley. In this vast space, there is room for your fatigue, room for your unanswered questions, and room for the quiet uncertainty of your future. You do not have to force these elements to resolve themselves before you are permitted to let go of your conscious grip. The universe is perfectly capable of holding the unformed pieces of your life while your body takes its necessary rest. Every slow, rhythmic rise and fall of your chest is a living proof that you are being sustained by a force that is infinitely larger than your analytical intellect. You can trust this rhythm completely, allowing the heavy architecture of your defense mechanisms to uncoil and dissolve into the deep shadows of your bed. As you sink deeper into this soft, effortless surrender, feel the profound physical relief that arrives when you completely stop fighting the natural turning of your seasons. The small lines of tension around your eyes, your jaw, and your hands are smoothing out entirely, melting away like cedar shavings dropping into the cool earth. There is no longer any ledger to check, no longer any peer to outrun, and no longer any need to justify your existence through constant, restless doing. The fire has cooled to a peaceful, silent ash. The heavy porous paddle rests undisturbed on the rim, and your mind has become as flat, cool, and clear as the water in the carpenter's earthenware cup. You are safely home, wrapped in a dark, protective sanctuary where your weary soul is fully permitted to drop its burdens and slide effortlessly into a deep, peaceful, and dreamless sleep. The dreamless sleep wraps around you like the softest linen after a long winter harvest, offering a boundless depth where the pressure of comparison can no longer touch your spirit. In this sacred pause, we begin to see that our constant obsession with staying young and hyperproductive is really an attachment to a static image of the self. We treat our identities like an immovable sculpture that must never change its shape, forgetting that life is a river that can never be frozen or held back by our small fears. The anxiety you feel at night is simply the mind trying to build a fortress out of a cloud, demanding that the fluid current of your energy remain locked in a single, youthful season forever. But the real freedom that Buddhist wisdom offers is the invitation to flow with the turning wheel of time, recognizing that every transition carries its own unique brilliance, its own irreplaceable depth, and its own way of serving the world. When we stop measuring our human value by the number of things we produce, we unlock a quiet dignity that needs no external validation to feel complete. You are not a machine designed to run at maximum speed until your gears grind to dust. You are a living, breathing expression of nature, and nature never demands that the autumn forest behave like the spring thaw. The trees are completely satisfied to let their leaves drop, to turn their sap inward, and to rest their roots deeply in the frozen earth, without a single moment of guilt or panic. They do not look across the valley to compare their bare branches with the evergreens, nor do they assume they are failing because their blossoms have disappeared. They understand that the silence of the winter is exactly what allows the strength of the wood to mature. By resting your body so deeply tonight, you are simply practicing that same elemental wisdom, letting the frantic outer world spin as fast as it wants while you reclaim your right to be still. Let the final remnants of your working mind uncoil completely, allowing your attention to merge with the vast, cool darkness that fills every corner of your room. The technological devices, the unfinished deadlines, the unread text messages, and the silent evaluations of others are all drifting out into the distance, losing their electrical pull on your nervous system. You are no longer required to be the caretaker of tomorrow's emergencies, while your body is trying to heal itself from the friction of today. The world can survive perfectly well without your guidance for the next few hours, and the paths of your future will open up to meet you exactly when the sun returns, regardless of how much you try to organize them in the dark. Your only assignment in this immediate moment is to allow yourself to be held by the steady, unmoving ground beneath your frame. As your breath becomes smaller, quieter, and completely effortless, feel the deep peace that arrives when you stop treating your own fatigue as a defect to be corrected through shame. The tight muscles across your forehead, your shoulders, and your limbs are softening entirely, letting go of their defensive grip like water sinking smoothly into dry sand. The heavy porcelain stirring paddle has done its work. The ancient indigo vat is perfectly cold and resting in the shadows, and your awareness has become a wide, unruffled sky that holds nothing but the simple, unhurried passing of the night. There are no separate paths left to analyze, no separate identities left to protect, and no separate versions of yourself left to fix or defend. You are returning to the silent, unchanging home that has always been waiting for you right beneath the noise of your thoughts, a sanctuary of pure presence that is entirely whole and entirely at peace. Let yourself dissolve completely into this beautiful velvety dark, trusting the night to shelter you, trusting the mattress to support you, and allowing your weary soul to slide effortlessly into a deep, peaceful, and unbroken rest. The unbroken rest expands into the deep hours of the night, a silent landscape where the mind no longer needs to construct any artificial boundaries or maintain the tiring illusion of constant control. When we look at the quiet settling of our own physical frame in the dark, we can begin to appreciate the profound difference between a life lived from the frantic surface and a life rooted in the unmoving depth. The constant pressure to achieve, to innovate, and to remain perpetually relevant is an artificial construct born out of our collective fear of the void. We treat the natural spaces of quietude and transition as if they were failures of our character, forgetting that the universe itself requires the dark intervals of winter and the stillness of midnight to maintain its vast structural integrity. Your current state of deceleration is not an empty absence of value, it is the vital, necessary gathering of your spirit back to its true, uncorved essence. Ancient wisdom reveals that when we stop demanding that our minds remain in a state of perpetual explosive motion, We finally allow the heavy sediment of our experiences to transform into clear, unshakable insight. This distillation process cannot be rushed by your willpower, and it cannot be achieved by whipping your tired mind with criticism or comparison in the late hours of the evening. It requires a radical, non-defensive willingness to sit with the unformed reality of your current season, letting the frantic, bubbling anxieties of the day dissolve into the dark background of your consciousness without giving them your obedience. You are not a separate, broken object that is being left behind by a faster world. You are the very awareness that witnesses the turning of the seasons, an infinite and unblemished space that remains completely whole whether your life is loud or quiet. Let your thoughts drift out like thin wisps of evening smoke rising above the old cedar shingles, leaving your mind completely open, spacious and empty of the day's ledgers. The modern anxieties that kept your chest tight a few hours ago, the unreturned notification, the fear of future obsolescence, and the subtle guilt of resting without earning it, have lost their geometric sharpness, blending harmlessly into the dark shadows of your room. You do not have to find a perfect answer for next year before your eyelids are permitted to grow heavy. The night around you is entirely non-judgmental, holding your heavy frame with an absolute, unmoving certainty that requires no justification and no spectacular display of talent to maintain its support. You are completely safe to let the machinery of your overthinking wind down into a soft, effortless glide. As you sink further into the supportive depth of your mattress, let your breathing become incredibly soft, quiet, and unhurried, like the slow movement of dark water inside an iron-hooped wooden vat that has rested in the earth for 40 winters. Every muscle along your brow, your jaw, and your hands has surrendered its daily guard, turning loose and receptive, completely free from the chore of steering your own destiny. The heavy porcelain stirring paddle is at rest, the unglazed earthenware cup is still, and your awareness has returned to its natural, primordial home, a sanctuary of pure, untroubled presence that has never left your side since the day you were born. There are no separate paths left to analyze, no separate versions of yourself left to fix, and no separate futures left to fear. Let yourself dissolve entirely into this beautiful, velvety dark, trusting the night to cradle you, trusting the ground to sustain you, and allowing your weary soul to slide effortlessly into a deep, peaceful, and dreamless sleep. The dreamless sleep deepens its hold upon the room, creating an absolute, unmapped sanctuary where the passage of hours carries no weight and demands no answers from your spirit. In this deep layer of physical surrender, the mind finally gives up its attachment to the old, frantic rhythm of the lower towns, realizing that the value of a human soul was never meant to be measured by the speed of its execution. We spend so much of our life running from the quietness of our own center, treating every pause or transition as the dangerous void that must be filled with immediate movement, frantic planning, or constant self-improvement. But ancient insight reminds us that the dark space between the thoughts is where the true wealth of our awareness actually lives. It is the uncarved, silent block of wood that holds the potential for all shapes, the deep sediment at the bottom of the basin that remains completely unaffected by the changing weather outside the walls. When you allow your mind to drop its heavy tools tonight, you are not failing your vocation or stepping backward. You are simply allowing your internal landscape to return to its natural, unvarnished state of grace. The frantic, bubbling energy that you have been mourning was merely a passing season, a volatile foam that had to clear away before your life could introduce you to the unshakable weight of your own seasoned depth. You do not need to be perpetually brilliant, perpetually fast, or perpetually young to maintain your indispensable place in the cosmic web. The mountain peak does not need to justify its stillness to the valley, and the old cedar shingles do not apologize for absorbing the dark rain in the shadows. They simply exist within the dignity of their own nature, completely satisfied to hold their space without needing to make a loud noise for the world to hear. Let your awareness sink even further beneath the surface of your thoughts, allowing your attention to become identical to the dense, cool liquid inside the resting vat. The digital monitors, the competitive ledgers, the comparisons with your peers, and the nagging fear of future irrelevance are all dissolving into the vast, non-judgmental dark of your room, losing their geometric sharpness until they are nothing more than faint, harmless shadows drifting through the background of your mind. You do not have to achieve absolute clarity or solve a single professional puzzle before your eyes are permitted to close for the evening. The night is completely satisfied to wrap your body in its protective embrace, holding your tired frame with an unconditional certainty that requires no proof of your productivity and no display of your talent before it agrees to give you rest. As your breathing becomes smaller, quieter, and completely unhurried, feel the profound physical relief that comes when you stop using shame to fix your own exhaustion. Every tiny fiber along your jaw, your forehead, and your hands has gone completely slack, soft and open like a plain piece of timber that has been laid down on the earthen floor of the workshop. The heavy porcelain stirring paddle has been set aside. The unglazed earthenware cup is resting in the shade, and your mind has become a wide, unruffled sky that holds nothing but the simple, silent movement of the late night as it settles over your roof. There are no separate paths left to calculate, no separate versions of yourself left to fix, and no separate futures left to fear. You are safely home, returning to the primordial, untroubled presence that has always been waiting for you right beneath the noise of your thoughts. Let yourself dissolve entirely into this beautiful velvety dark, trusting the night to cradle you, trusting the ground to sustain you, and allowing your weary soul to slide effortlessly into a deep, peaceful, and dreamless sleep.